Welcome to the Onside CFL Fantasy Football Podcast. 2016 CFL season, a few short weeks away, 2 weeks away from training camp. We got same show from last year, bit of a different format. Dave, Dan the Stats Guy is welcomed onto the show. Dan, excited for this year's fantasy football season?
Well, I better be. I guess if we're going to be talking about fantasy football and about the CFL season, I better be excited about it.
Got to play Captain Obvious, don't you?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's one of those things that the snow's all gone. Everyone's got their Excel documents out, getting ready for their drafts in the next month here. So we're ready to get going on talking about this. And of course, I'm excited. I hope you're excited as well.
Not at all. Going to bore your brains out completely. Get your friends together, do some trash talk. Who cares about the rest of the crap? We'll get to that in a second. Let's get right into the battles that are going to be going on week by week into training camp. We'll start talking about that next week. But first, why don't we go team by team?
Yeah, well, I mean, last season, obviously, Edmonton Eskimos come away with the big Grey Cup win. Myself and my own fantasy league on fantasy.ca. We'll talk about fantasy.ca. I know other podcasts as well will talk about a lot of questions about that. But I, of course, in our league came away as the grand champion. The championship belt. I think my ring's on order. Everything with that, it's a good feeling. So, we can look back at last season, but I know for yourself, you want to move on to this season. So, we might as well forget about all that and all the players that have moved on to the NFL and retired and whatever else, and let's talk about the guys that are here.
What you're not seeing off the air is I'm doing the old Jack in the Box crank of the proverbial finger to Dan right now, who beat me. Was I even in the finals last year? I probably crapped the bed again. Speaking of teams that crapped the bed in 2015, none other than the heart of football in green and white last season. What a putrid defense, but lots of moves in the offseason last year. We don't need to really recap it for the most part, but why don't we fly through 3-15, points for 430, had a good offense. Defense was the worst in the league at 563, but we believe in the Riders this year.
Well, Chris Jones, obviously, and I think that's one of the things that a lot of people in the league are talking about is that Chris Jones brought his entire coaching staff, and so they have their system, they have their way that they conduct meetings, they have everything that trust as coach is already set in place. So I think there's going to be a lot of hope for Rider fans this season, particularly with this offense. Stephen McAdoo has been working pretty closely already with Darian Durant, and you look at that receiving group, and that's one of those groups where Shamad Chambers comes over from Edmonton.
Big fat contract.
And the holdovers in Roosevelt and Rob Bagg, they add John Childs. Kendall Lawrence is going to be Kendall Lawrence in Chris Jones and Stephen McAdoo's offense. He's going to be that all-featured, all-over-the-field guy. And don't forget, in this last week, they added Clarence Denmark, who comes over from Winnipeg in a salary cap, situation and ends up in Ryder Green. So Durant's got targets. I think you would agree on that right away.
Those who've played fantasy football before are laughing at you as you said John Childs, but he's a guy that we firmly believe, and we'll talk about this in weeks to come and at days long after that if he stays healthy, you'll be laughing your way to the bank.
Well, and he takes that position that Darrell Walker had in the Edmonton offense last year as that big target. You talk about a Darius Bowman, and that might be Naaman Roosevelt this season. So those are probably going to be the two big targets. The Canadians on the other side and Chambers and Bagg, those are going to be two guys that also are going to be fed heavily. And as we talked about, Lawrence, don't forget about Nick Dembski. Dembski is in his second year. Lots of opportunity for them. They want him to be a star in this league, ready for him to go. And Curtis Steele in the backfield, Rider offense ready to go.
Not forgetting with the other side of the ball, where the Riders had all the problems last year, which we need not advertise anymore. And you've alluded to Chris Jones. They made some big splashes, especially among the front four.
Well, and another move just in the last week here with the currently injured, but apparently going to be ready to go midway through the season in Eric Norwood. So they've got competition on that front four with Sean Lemon and Justin Capicotti both coming over from Ottawa to start the season. Norwood comes in. He's going to create a competition. Those are going to be guys that are going to be having a track meet trying to get to the quarterback of the opposing team.
We won't do any record predictions yet. We'll get to that later on as the weeks come. But why don't we go up the standings here to the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. 5-13 last year, 353 points for. Absolutely horrendous. Worst in the league. Defense at 502. Gave up a lot of yards. Second only to the Riders. But they made some big moves in the offseason.
Well, and I think that's the thing, that Drew Woolley needs weapons. They've brought in weapons, and two of those big weapons came from Riderville and moved one province over. Weston Dressler and Ryan Smith move over, and they'll take slot back positions. Rory Collert and Darvin Adams are going to be holdovers, and then there's going to be competition, really strong competition. Unfortunately for the Bombers, they had a couple guys that they had under contract, thought they were going to come in as rookies and light the league on fire. Both of them have retired, so it's going to be an open competition at that receiver position. And then obviously the big signing in Winnipeg, I think bigger than those receivers, and I think you'd agree with me, as a Canadian back gives so much flexibility for the Bombers, and that's Andrew Harris. And I know for you, you're happy to see him get out of Wally Bono / Jacques Chapdelaine / anybody that's been in BC. Paul LaPolice is going to do some good things with Andrew Harris this year.
Longtime listeners of the Rouge Radio podcast, which we still have a great relationship with those boys, would know my soapbox of Andrew Harris as well. Other side of the ball, always been a problem for the Bombers. Going underneath likely will still be a problem this year, if not for their front four.
Yeah, well, you look at Westerman, Jamal Westerman this year. Last year he kind of lit the league on fire and came out of nowhere. A lot of people didn't really know about him as an NFL player, but comes in, has a huge season, and because he's not going to have, I think, the same amount of, double teams, triple teams, whatever you want to call it, that Bomber defense is going to be that much better, in my opinion, because he's going to be able to face a lot more one-on-ones.
Bombers likely going to win a lot of games by their offense this year, as we'll get to, as we mentioned later on when talking about record predictions. The BC Lions last year, 7-11, that last playoff spot, thanks to the futility of those bottom two teams, 437 points for, 486 offense, and one of the biggest positional battles, which we'll talk about next week, lies right in the camp of the team on the left coast. Yeah,
well, two positions on offense there. Obviously, Jonathan Jennings at the end of the season comes in and really saves that BC season that was heading downhill. He comes in after Travis Lulay gets injured, after, a brief, tryout by Jeff Tedford in that position, comes in, and Wally Buono has already said he's the starter coming in, but Lulay is going to compete with him on that. So he'll have a veteran behind him ready to go if he ever jumps in the wrong direction. And then in the backfield, the signings they made there, Jeremiah Johnson and Anthony Allen, there's going to be a competition there in their backfield. That's going to be the best one in the league. Make sure you listen next week. We're going to unpack that one. And going through the receiving core, a lot of changes there. But on the other side of the ball, would it be suffice to say one of the most underrated defenses in the entire CFL? Yeah, and one that I think there's a couple names there. I think TJ Lee is a guy that you had said it, I think, last year. TJ Lee was a guy to watch for, and 80-something tackles last year as a halfback in the league. He's all over the field, flying around. He picked up a couple of interceptions, too. One of your top fantasy players on the defensive side of the ball. Solomon Elimimian, that's a huge question mark there. Obviously, he missed the majority of the remainder of the season after suffering a torn Achilles tendon. Certain positions, it's tough for a guy to come back from that type of injury. That's going to be the question. Is he going to be able to come back and be the same player? But at the same time, Adam Bighill is Adam Bighill. And you put those two together, I think the presence alone of Elimimian as a leader on that defense, he's still going to be, I think, if anything, one of the best linebackers, even if he's not 100%. And Adam Bighill is going to be a guy that's just going to be Adam Bighill again, getting tackles, making big plays for the BC Lions. The team that's made big plays year in and year out and won't be making a lot this year. We're not going to make many friends talking about the Calgary Stampeders in 2016, I'll tell you that much. 14 wins, 4 losses last year, tied for the Edmonton Eskimos. The Eskies won the head-to-head for the first time in 190 years. 478 points for, 346 against. But the Calgary Stampeders this year,
we see red flags, no pun intended, going up everywhere.
Well, and I think one of the big things that I think people are talking about Jerome Messam coming in, and don't get me wrong, Jerome Messam had a fantastic year last year. But I think a lot of what made the Calgary Stampeders seem almost invincible the last number of years was the John Cornish factor. Teams were afraid of John Cornish wherever he was in the field, whether it was carrying the ball out of the backfield, catching passes out of the backfield, or whatever. And I think Cornish brought a lot of leadership to that locker room as well. They lose him. They lose Keon Raymond out of the locker room, who on that defense has been there for, it seems like, over 10 years now. Two guys that were just the heart and soul. Juwan Simpson is another player. And so there's a bit of turnover to Calgary that people really aren't talking about. I think people have come accustomed to the idea that, maybe this is the year the Calgary Stampeders go down, and then they go, oh, I was wrong again. So they're hesitant to say Calgary's not going to be the same team. But the one other thing that I think people need to look at with this Calgary Stampeders team is that defensive secondary. 4 of the 5 starters on that secondary are already over the age of 30. Keon Raymond leaves as one of the linebackers, but they lose that leadership. Yeah, they got leadership, blah, blah, blah. But can these guys carry that level of play now that they're on the north side of 30? That'll be a question to watch this season.
We'll be talking a lot about the Stampeders, and people will be throwing their arms up in the air a whole lot this year. The Edmonton Eskimos, as I mentioned, 14-4, 466, 341. Need no introduction. Came home with the Grey Cup. And a lot of turnover in the offseason. They're a team that we kind of look at and kind of scratch our heads going, I don't know, defensively, are there question marks? Offense looks to be okay.
Well, and that's one of the things. I think Jason Moss did a good thing by hiring Mike Benavides as his defensive coordinator. I think Ed Hervey was also in on that decision as well. Mike Benavides was a fantastic defensive coordinator before becoming the head coach in BC. He learned under Wally Buono. I think at any point during the season when Jason Moss has questions of what do I do in this situation? What do I say here? How do I handle this? Mike Benavides is going to be a great source of information for Jason Moss. And I think what that'll create is, they've been there before. They know how to win already. And any situations where they need leadership from the coaching staff, I think Jason Moss will be really able to lean on Mike Benavides. And you look at new additions on the offense there. Chris Getzlaff comes in from the Riders, a guy that's won a Grey Cup, a veteran player. They add on the defense, not a whole lot of change there, a whole lot of continuity on the defense. So it may be a little bit of a different system, but Mike Benavides will coach them up. He'll have them playing at a high level of play. And that fact that there's not a whole lot of change in Edmonton is a good thing for Eskimos fans.
Yeah, secondary, some question marks there with Aaron Grimes leaving and Otha Foster, obviously, in the defensive side too. But we'll be scratching our head. But Mike Benavides run defense usually is able to get some wins. A defense that really is one of the only reasons why they got some wins last year was they move off to the East Division. The Montreal Alouettes at 6-12, 388 points for, 402 against. And much of the same this year, I think, Dan, the stats guy. At not a whole lot of hope on the offensive side, dare I say, but a stalwart defense again.
Well, obviously, again, the question mark is at that quarterback position. Anthony Calvillo now is the offensive coordinator in Montreal. He's taken his time in accepting that position. He's going to have to provide a lot of leadership. Rakeem Cato was forced into duty early in the season last year. He looks like he's going to be somebody in the next couple of years that might be a good player. Jonathan Crompton was the starter last year. Kevin Glenn, I don't know if he still got it or not to be able to be the full-time starter for Montreal. I know he had signed in Saskatchewan specifically to be the number 2 guy waiting in the wings. The question mark is there at quarterback for the Montreal Alouettes, and for their receivers, it's a fantastic receiving group. Don't get me wrong. Deron Carter, wow, am I excited to see what he can do this season. S.J. Green is a guy that, it just seems like maybe in my mind I lump him and Jamal Richardson together in my mind, but it just seems like between those two, there's going to be there's been a slot back in that Montreal offense since, I don't know, the mid-'80s, it seems like.
S.J. Green somehow is almost the forgotten guy still.
He is. And they add Kenny Stafford. BJ Cunningham's going to be a name to watch as well. He came on strong at the end of the season. That Montreal offense, don't forget the running backs. Tyrell Sutton, a lot of people are calling for him to be one of the top 3 running backs in the league, but we both agree on this one
that
Brandon Rutley is going to be putting the pressure on him. He did last year. as the season wore on, and maybe Brandon Rutley cannot come out of nowhere where people don't expect it and win the job.
Can never have too many running backs, but linebackers is something you don't want a whole lot of. And when you look at their linebacking situation, what are they going to do?
And that's one that we're going to talk about next week as training camps open. The Montreal Alouettes, obviously last year, first game of the season, lose Bear Woods for the year. Bear Woods, 2 seasons ago, I would say was one of the top 3 linebackers in the CFL, particularly from a fantasy standpoint. And they bring in a guy that nobody really knew much about. Kyler Ellsworth played at Michigan State University, came in and he lit the league on fire as a middle linebacker for the Alouettes. Winston Venable, one of the top weak side linebackers in the league. And then there's Chip Cox too. Now they have these 4 guys. They have an opportunity there where who knows what happens there, whether they make a trade, whether they obviously in the offseason had to let go of Enoch Mwamba, who was a ratio breaker for them, somebody that it was a real shock to see, but they did it, and there was one move. They have to make another move or move someone somewhere else.
I'm not going to lie. That is what I'm probably the most excited to talk about is that positional battle. You let go of a Enoch Mwamba, you got a wealth of talent in one position. A team with a wealth of talent, a receiver last year, the Toronto Argos, just got edged out for the home playoff game last year. Hamilton tied with them 10-8, 438 for points for, 499 points against. Much of the same for the Argos, minus a big hole in the quarterback position.
Well, a hole or a veteran coming back. And that's the thing. I think last year coming into the season, not many people knew what the health of Ricky Ray was. And so Toronto was hard to predict, hard to really know what that type of a team they were going to be at. They had a lot of rookie receivers. So what was this team going to look like? Trevor Harris obviously did a fantastic job, led them to the playoffs. Now Ricky Ray comes back, and the question comes, how many more years does Ricky Ray have in the CFL? He's been in the league for a number of years. He's one injury away from, again, missing another season. Will there be rust? All these questions with Ricky Ray, but the weapons are there around him.
Yep. He also has some on the other side of the ball to prevent the team from allowing points to be put up against them. They made some changes too, but they're just a tough team overall to predict, I think. But the Argos, I think, are going to be competitive.
Well, and the X factor there is, I think, you look at the coaches in this league, and this might be one of those years where there's not a bad coach in this league, and that's going to create a lot of parity. And that's going to be something, I think, as we go through training camps and into the regular season, the discussion of there's not going to be a massively dominant team or a massively horrible team. There's going to be a lot of parity this year, and the worst team can beat the first team. And it's going to be an exciting year. And the X factor for Toronto that allows them to be in consideration for a really good team is Scott Milanovich, the head coach.
Yeah, and if you're looking at 2 teams that you love to talk about the most, if you're on the east side, you'll say these next 2. If you're in the west, you might say Edmonton, Calgary. But overall, I think now, this year, everyone could be in agreement. Hamilton and Ottawa are going to be 2 of the most exciting teams to watch as we move on to the Ticats. 530 points for, 391 against at 10-8. And you and I would probably agree there'd probably be 100 more points for if it weren't for one guy going down for the season.
Well, and Zach Collaros again, and just announced in the last couple of weeks here, Collaros isn't going to be ready for the 2016 season. That's a huge, huge guy for the Ticat offense. The question is, would he have been the leading them to a Grey Cup championship had he stayed healthy last year? Unfortunately for him, he gets injured late in the year, and the Ticats just don't have enough to get past Ottawa in that Eastern final. But they've added weapons around him. Chad Owens, the Flying Hawaiian, comes over down the 401 from Toronto. I think Owens will come in and really be that, veteran force that maybe they need to go along with Andy Fantus.
Yeah, and we could talk at length, as we will, about the offense and the defensive side. Needs no introduction. Tim Hortons Field, how they played last year, and I don't think there should be any drop-off for the Ticats.
Well, and continuity there as well. Another team where they went almost the distance, and they've kept that group for the most part intact. Taylor Reid obviously goes over to the Calgary Stampeders, and they replace him with Alex Hoffman-Ellis, who filled in for Ellen Mimian in BC. So veteran group, a lot of questions or different scenarios now with Craig Butler, the safety, going down to an injury here in the offseason.
The Ottawa Red Blacks, came into Winnipeg in November, surprised everybody in the Grey Cup. Many thought that game would be almost a cakewalk for the Eskimos, but the Red Blacks pushed and pushed, made that an exciting game at 12-6 last year, 464 points for, 454 against. They were fun to watch almost every game of the year last year.
Well, and that smile on Henry Burris's face was there from week one to the Grey Cup. He was the Henry of old, the Henry that slung the ball around and put up big numbers. And that Ottawa offense, it was an exciting second year for the Red Blacks. It was interesting because coming into last year, not many people with the Red Blacks either knew how to predict them. They were previously an expansion 3-15 team, just looked horrible some weeks as an expansion team. They put it together last year, and it shows how quickly a team can come together and go off and put on huge points and huge yards as an offense. And don't forget about that defense either in Ottawa.
Yeah, a lot of movement on the defensive side too, where you look at, Abdul Kanay had a great season last year. We haven't even talked about the receivers, which we'll talk about positional battles next week. But as we're talking about a lot of these topics, as you're getting ready for your fantasy football season, I think one of the big things that we were excited about last year, and I mentioned off the top the relationship with the Rouge Radio guys, still talk to them a lot, and we had a fantasy football prep kit last year that we put together. Dan, the stats guy, was the brains behind that one. Been working pretty tirelessly on something that'll be coming out very, very soon that you can get ready for your fantasy football prep kits.
Well, the 2016 fantasy guide, it's going to be a full guide, over 200 player previews with full write-ups on the player, what to expect to them. And this year, where it wasn't there last year, full projections on what's going to be happening as far as the way that we see it with those player stats. So something for you to keep in mind coming down the pipeline here. It's going to be something you're going to be able to order in a PDF format, have it ready to go for your drafts, and hashtag win your league.
Yeah, very, very shortly we'll have that out. And if you were a purchaser of the last one, this one goes far more in depth. Dan, the stats guy, went back and probably every depth chart for every game last year and to look through. It's going to be pretty sexy. We'll have more about that in the coming weeks. But to go along with that, we've had a lot of questions on social media. You can follow us at CFL Fantasy FTB on Twitter. Many, many people have been asking what the plan is for Fantaseh, what the plan is for fantasy football this year. We don't really know. We've tried to reach out to the Fantaseh guys, and we haven't heard really anything from them.
Well, and I think one of the things that fantasy football fans in CFL paid attention and really perked their ears up was Commissioner Jeffrey Orridge at his State of the CFL address at the Grey Cup in Winnipeg said that it is going to be a focus. They want to reach a younger demographic and get to a new group of people that have maybe never even watched CFL before. And I know for a lot of people that do end up playing fantasy football at CFL, they might not be that big of fans of the league. As soon as they play it, they're right in there watching the games right next to the most hardcore fans. So we'll try also to get in touch with the CFL and hear what's coming down the line from their office as far as what kind of format they're going to be going with. But keep the tweets coming. Both to the CFL, both to Fantaseh, both to your aunt in Windsor, whoever wants to listen. Just get the drum beat going. We want more and more fantasy football in the CFL.
Tell your aunt to follow us as well. Yeah. Send us some cookies potentially if you like to. At CFL Fantasy FTB, at Dan_UK1 on Twitter, myself at Dave Dawson 7. And next week, we'll be talking about position by position battles. This training camp already begins coming up at the end of the month. Lower Your Weapons by Revolution Engine will send us into the night. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week.